If you frighten your enemy enough, you may defeat him without having to fight. This is the war tactic of Los Zetas, who managed to strike fear into some of the most deadly Mexican drug gangs. Their violence raised the bar in just how brutal a drug cartel can be, and has left damage and misery in Mexico and Central America. The world of crime would never be the same. Formation. Our story starts in June 1999, when two old friends were meeting up with each other. Gulf cartel leader Osiel Cardenas Guillen was meeting with his friend Angel Salvador Gomez Herrera. They had not seen each other since the christening of Guillen's daughter, where Herrera was the godfather. In Catholicism, the godfather is chosen as a second parent to the child, and should the parents ever die, the godparent will take over as their guardian. Little did Herrera know that Guillen was literally trying to end the life of the godfather of one of his children. On the port city of El Mezquital, Tamaulipas, Chava had arrived by motorboat, and Osiel had told his friend that he would drive him to where he was staying. Osiel brought a hitman with him to take his friend out, who would pose as a guard. Osiel collected Chava in his SUV. Chava hopped in the passenger seat while Osiel's guard sat in the back seat. They began engaging in friendly conversation and caught up with each other on various issues. They spoke about the weather, politics, and about how his beautiful little godchild was doing. Then Osiel gave a signal, and a gun was now pointed at Chava's head. The trigger was pulled without hesitation, and Chava was killed instantly. The killer in question was Arturo Guzman de Quena, an ex-military man who is now using his military training and experience to become a hitman for drug lords. This was the beginning of Los Zetas. Chava's funeral was open casket, and other members of the mob could see how disfigured he had become. Osiel soon became known as El Mata Amigos, or the Friend Killer. This killing would help Osiel cement his leadership even further in the Gulf Cartel, which now controlled a huge section of Mexico's drug business in the northeast. The city of Nuevo Laredo, along the Texas border, was responsible for 40% of Mexico's drug trade, and business was simply booming. Bill Clinton announced the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement, which opened up barriers between the two countries. At the same time, the US military was also clamping down on cocaine smuggling by the sea into Florida, so the Colombians decided to just work with the Mexican cartels to cross the border. It's believed that 8,000 vehicles and more than 300,000 people cross the border every day through the international bridge it shares with Texas. The sheer volume of traffic means that it is impossible to check every vehicle that crosses over. To protect these astronomical business interests, Guillen wanted the cartel to have its own military, a separate faction they could use when the cartel needed to go to war. They would also work as hitmen who would specifically target rival cartel members. Instead of training a new army, maybe they could poach members from the Mexican army. After all, there are Mexican military members who they already bribed to turn a blind eye to their drug smuggling initiatives. This was a completely new idea, as Mexican military members turning to a life of crime was considered unthinkable. A conversation between Osiel and Guzman went as follows. Cardenas Guillen: I want the best men, the best. Guzman de Quena: what type of people do you need? Cardenas Guillen: the best armed men that there are. Guzman de Quena: these are only in the army. Cardenas Guillen: I want them. So, what led these Mexican military members to betray their oath to protect their country? What led them to decide that rather than protecting their citizens, they would endanger them? The simple answer is money talks. They were given significantly higher pay. It was referred to as canonazo de dólares, or cannonball of dollars. They were promised that they would never have to eat maruchan, a packaged noodle soup which makes spam seem like foie gras. However, there is some dispute about this too. Other writers about this transformation argue that the Mexican military was set to be under investigation for human rights abuses. So, if you had anything to hide, or there were things that you felt might incriminate you, now was the time to get out. And Osiel was a charismatic man. People wanted to work for him.
Osiel was a genius at being able to read people and manipulate them. He was brilliant at influencing people to do things that they shouldn't be doing.
Guzman is believed to have started off as an army informant. Eventually, he realized just how much money they were making and defected from the army to the cartel. Arturo Guzman de Quena became Z1. Like any other military, they were given numbers. He was followed by Rogelio González Pizana, Z2, and Heriberto Lazcano, Z3. Eventually, the party had 30 members to their name, and like any army, they had a radio system which would keep them in constant contact. The fact that all of these members had military training meant that they were incredibly skilled and organized, and were at a level no other cartel had ever been before. The DEA described them as the most technologically advanced, sophisticated, and violent of these paramilitary enforcement groups. They employed their military discipline, their respect for the chain of command, and their ability to follow orders no matter what. This was a level of expertise way beyond the average cartel member. The tragedy is that they were trained in the military to fight against drug cartels. Not only were they trained by the Mexican military, but also in the US. They were given communication and reading courses, as well as how to use light and heavy machinery. Ironically, the US was helping the Mexican Mexican military so it could deal with its drug gangs. Instead, they were simply training some of its most brutal killers. Early missions. In February 1999, Arturo Guzman de Quena and his early members were ordered to make a hit on Rolando Lopez Salinas, or El Rolis. 20 of his men ambushed his home and were hit back with gunfire. One man in the crew decided to blow up a gas tank and killed everyone inside. Several of El Rolis' guards were killed, but El Rolis himself managed to escape. It was a failed hit, but Ociel was impressed with the operation. As a friend killer, Ociel had established himself as a key leader of the Gulf Cartel, and he was incredibly paranoid, to the extent that he wanted Los Zetas to eliminate his suspected enemies before they went after him. Los Zetas took inspiration from the most evil people to walk the earth. They would adopt the war tactic of blitzkrieg, which came from Nazi Germany and means lightning war. This involved attacking and surprising your enemy and swiftly taking over territory. Like ISIS, they used to take their levels of brutality to a new extreme, hoping to strike fear into the hearts of anyone who seeks to take them down. Sometimes victims were skinned alive, and they would sometimes remove their hearts of their enemies too. It was all to show their enemies that they were above them when it came to levels of what they were willing to do. Los Zetas simply ripped up the rulebook of organized crime. As the author George Grayson explains, traditionally, the country's narcotics cartels maximized earnings by working hand in glove with police, military officers, intelligence agencies, union leaders, and office holders affiliated with the Institutional Revolutionary Party, which dominated the political landscape from 1929 to 2000. Previously, these were unspoken rules that you never harmed any citizens, particularly women or children. Most executions would take place in remote areas. But with Los Zetas, things got much more violent. This had a knock-on effect where other cartels competing with them also had to get more violent. According to Grayson, sadism was their brand. Even the Sinaloas are now decapitating people, he said. You have to keep up with the Joneses. You have to have cartel cred, being known as the meanest, most savage criminal organization in the Americas. Los Zetas had just raised the bar, and the other cartels had to beat them at their own game, conquering Nuevo Laredo. In the early 2000s, Nuevo Laredo was controlled by El Chacho, who would pay a toll for drug traffickers passing through. However, there are two possible reasons that led to his downfall. One theory is that El Chacho double-crossed the Gulf Cartel and tried to steal a drug shipment. Another theory is that the Gulf Cartel was simply sick of paying the toll and wanted control for themselves. Whichever of the theories is true, it had the same result for El Chacho. In true military style, Los Zetas ambushed the city of Nuevo Laredo and took it for themselves. Not only did they not have to pay the toll, they could also eliminate their competition, as the Sinaloa cartel needed to transport drugs through there too. But El Chacho had many people who were loyal to him, and they were not taking control of this territory without a fight. This was the start of a year-long territorial drug feud, the crackdown. Los Zetas were causing havoc in Mexico, and they needed someone brave enough to stand up to them. And in November 2002, the Mexican authorities had a minor win when they captured El Cacahuate. To give you an insight into how Los Zetas had grown, El Cacahuate was not necessarily a soldier for them. He was their treasurer. Los Zetas was becoming a profitable and successful business. Members of the Los Zetas were making lots and lots of money. But money only goes so far. In 2001, Rogelio González Pizana, or Z2, was arrested by the Mexican military, but to spare himself from prison, he became an informant. Los Zetas originated from people betraying the army, so it was inevitable that these would go on to betray Los Zetas. In November 2002, Arturo Guzman de Quena, Z1, was dining out in a restaurant, and the police suspiciously knew his location. It was highly likely that Guzman was carrying a weapon, and as an experienced military officer, he was not someone you wanted to engage in a gunfight, especially in a bar. Instead, the military did not waste time arresting him and enacted the same level of brutality on him. They went into the restaurant and shot him dead. A few months later, Gonzalez may have tipped off the police of Ociel's whereabouts, and his days were now numbered. He too was captured. It was during this time that Heriberto Lazcano, nicknamed the Executioner, came to the fore. He was given this nickname because folklore held that he thrived on feeding some of his victims to his private collection of lions and tigers. But there was still instability. With Ociel no longer at the helm, the enemies of Los Zetas thought that it was now or never, and they needed to pounce during this golden opportunity. This led to one of the most brutal gangland feuds in world history. The Sinaloa cartel moved 200 men into Los Zetas in the hopes of gaining control of the territory. It was the same brutal and swift attack that Los Zetas were known for, and the Sinaloa cartel basically had to become more like Los Zetas to compete. Regrettably, other syndicates like the La Familia Michoacan, the Knights Templar, and even the Sinaloa cartel have copied some of their abominations, giving rise to what Grayson calls the Zetanization of Mexico's ineffective drug war. The battle went on, and the biggest losers were the ordinary people of Nuevo Laredo, whose home was now a battlefield. The strategic strategic importance of this borderland city meant that no side was willing to concede. Between 2003 and 2005, 1,000 people were killed, and this figure doesn't include the many who simply disappeared. Mexico's then president, Vicente Fox Quesada, was urged to intervene. He sent a battalion of military members to disrupt the war, and this helped calm things down in Nuevo Laredo. However, this only ended up spreading the war further across Mexico into the central state of Michoacan and the Pacific coast resort of Acapulco. The government was not doing its main job, which was to protect its citizens. So in June 2005, a new police chief was recruited to set things straight in Nuevo Laredo. Alejandro Dominguez Coelho made himself chief of police of the city when everybody else was too afraid. In his statement, he said, "I am not beholden to anyone. I have a duty to the citizenry." Only 6 hours later, he was entering his car and a vehicle pulled up beside him. A gunman emerged and shot him dead, with blood spilling onto the road. The one person who chose to publicly stand up to these people did not last one day. In 2006, Felipe Calderón was elected as president and promised a war on drugs, where the military would take down Mexico's cartels, and he literally sent troops into cartel areas. And in response to this message, Los Zetas remembered their motto: if you frighten your enemy enough, you may defeat him without having to fight. Their actions with the election of Calderón were unspeakable. In 2006, shortly before Calderón deployed tens of thousands of soldiers to combat the violence, a group of armed thugs rolled 5 heads onto the dance floor of a nightclub in central Mexico. And in 2006, Lazcano, aka the executioner, took control of the cartel. His deputy was Miguel Ángel El Forti Trevino Morales. A hitman for Los Zetas later said that El Forti could not sleep at night unless he killed. Trevino Morales loved to hunt, whether his prey was deer or people. During this time, Los Zetas' main rival in the war in Nuevo Laredo was a Sinaloa cartel-affiliated group named BLO. They had changed leaders and dissociated themselves from the Sinaloa cartel, so Los Zetas and BLO joined forces. And when finding new recruits, instead of looking for members of the Mexican military, Lazcano looked further south to Guatemala. According to Grayson's book, the Guatemalan forces worked on a completely different level than any other military. They must learn to eat anything that moves, bite the heads off live chickens, and kill puppies after bonding with them. The unit's motto is, if I advance, follow me. If I stop, urge me on. If I retreat, kill me. And as much as Calderón was fighting a war on drugs, the situation on the ground was much different. In Grayson's book, he shows one of the accounts of Los Zetas. $18,000 was paid to lookouts, which only accounted for 2% of their expenditure. Security was 0.17%. Gifts were 7.73%. Raffles, including 5 Rolex watches, accounted for 3.86%. But at the bottom of these accounts, it was revealed that 85% of their expenditure went towards payoffs to police. So Calderón's framing as a war on drugs where the police were going to tackle drug crime was not so simple. The author, Guadalupe Correa Cabrera, whose family was intimidated by Los Zetas, said, "The US media still portrays it as a war between the good and the bad, the Mexican government and the drug cartels, but there was a whole other level of violence injected into the conflict after former President Felipe Calderón sent the military out to the streets to fight these cartels in 2006. Their success during this time, according to her, was incredibly suspicious. How did the Zetas and other groups get access to so much military equipment? Where are the arms coming from? And who is facilitating the entrance of so many arms to Mexico? Why do the anti-drug trafficking programs never stop the flow of drugs across the border, but just keep generating more profits and more violence? Apparently, most of the weapons were bought in the US, and they could smuggle them through the border through pacts they had with border patrol officers. For Los Zetas to function, they needed people working with the Mexican government and police to facilitate them. If you were an authority figure in Mexico, you were either bribed or faced violence. They would bend or break you. And the poverty levels of Mexico played right into Los Zetas' hands. Above a bridge in April 2006, a banner read, "The operations group Los Zetas wants you, military or ex-military. We offer a good salary, food, and will take care of your family. You will no longer be mistreated and will no longer go hungry. We won't give you maruchan to eat." And Los Zetas was so feared that some daring opportunists began to pretend that they were Zetas militants too. However, the Zetas were quick to respond to anyone who dared to pass off as one of their own. In February of 2009, 2 men who pretended to be Zetas were killed, and alongside them was a note which read, "This is what will happen to those who attempt to pass themselves off as Zetas." A new split. Toward the end of the 2000s, Los Zetas had grown in size and stature and questioned their allegiance to the Gulf Cartel. Why would they share the spoils with the Gulf Cartel when they could simply keep it all to themselves? And the Gulf Cartel was also breaking away too. As deadly as they were, even they were not entirely comfortable with the violence and brutality of Los Zetas. This type of violence was not practical either, as it was drawing a lot of attention to themselves, both from the US and Mexico. By 2009, Los Zetas were the most dangerous gang in town. The Procuraduría General de la República, Mexico's Attorney General's office published a list of the top 37 cartel kingpins in March 2009. 14 people on that list belonged to Los Zetas. Only 5 of the most sought individuals belonged to the Sinaloa cartel, which controlled an equal amount of territory. The Sinaloa cartel was making the same amount of money, but not facing the same backlash from authorities. But it was one particular incident that caused the ripples between the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas to finally boil over. In January of 2010, several members of the Gulf Cartel kidnapped Victor Peña Mendoza, a prominent member of Los Zetas. They asked him to switch his allegiance from Los Zetas to the Gulf Cartel, and when he refused, they killed him. And then word got back to Los Zetas. They asked the Gulf Cartel to hand over their assassin by the 25th of January. This day came and went, but the culprit was not handed over. So, naturally, Los Zetas killed 16 Gulf Cartel members. The alliance was broken, and a new gangland war was underway. Diversification. Following the split from the cartel, Los Zetas lost a considerable amount of business. As I mentioned earlier, the Gulf Cartel handled most of the drug trafficking, whereas Los Zetas were involved in conquering territories or killing rival gang members. Their drug trafficking territory decreased since this, and they had to find other means of making money. So, they started extorting other criminals. Where Los Zetas would provide protection, primarily from Los Zetas, they would also trade counterfeit goods, and were even involved in CD and DVD piracy. But their biggest operation, in 2010, this made headline news.
Well, at least 66 people are dead and almost 80 others injured after a pipeline exploded in Mexico.
The cause of the explosion was unknown, but what they did know was that in the aftermath, thieves from Los Zetas began to siphon off the oil. This opened up a huge new moneymaker, where they sold cheaper oil on the black market. Over time, Correa Cabrera found that Los Zetas was taking over territories that had little or nothing to do with the drug trade, and Los Zetas was almost an energy company rather than a drug cartel. In certain cases, the Mexican authorities were buying fuel from Los Zetas. For instance, in the state of Coahuila, we see a connection between former governor Humberto Moreira and the Zetas. There's a lot of documentation about the state-owned electric company buying coal from the Zetas, who had taken over some of the coal mines in Coahuila, then turning around and selling energy to the federally owned power company. In February of that year, the Beltran Leyva cartel and Los Zetas engaged in a violent and brutal war against a pact of the Sinaloa and the Gulf cartels. This took place in the border city of Reynosa, which became a war zone. Even the surrounding towns of this city became ghost towns. At the same time, there were also sanctuary cities where cartel members would not fight in, and this is where most of their families would reside during this war. Mexico City in particular was not a strategic location for drug smuggling, so has received limited cartel violence. For ordinary Mexican citizens, it was evil cartels facing each other. But by August 2010, it was clear that Los Zetas were at a new level of evil. It was an incident that made the Sinaloa and Gulf cartel look like saints in comparison. The massacres. On August 24th, Los Zetas were engaged in a battle with the Mexican army, leaving 4 people dead. But the army managed to get inside of one of Los Zetas' ranches, and what they found inside shocked them to the core. An image that even the most hardened military man would still find difficult to understand. 72 immigrant bodies were hidden inside the ranch, most of which were people traveling from Central America. In 2011, just when you think things couldn't get any worse, it became clear that things had not yet reached rock bottom. In fact, they were about to get much, much darker. In a chilling testimony from the chief investigator Jose Juan Morales, he paints a pretty gruesome picture of what happened in the town of Alegre. We have testimony from people who say they participated in the crime. They described some 50 trucks arriving in Allende, carrying people connected to the cartel. They broke into houses, they looted them and burned them. Afterward, they kidnapped the people who lived in those houses and took them to a ranch just outside Allende. First, they killed them. They put them inside a storage shed filled with hay. They doused them with fuel and lit them on fire, feeding the flames for hours and hours. The state believes that there were only 28 victims, but groups formed by the victims' relatives contend that there were up to 300. Later that year, the horror continued over in San Fernando. Between April 6th and June 7th, 2011, Los Zetas halted several buses traveling through the area. The people in these buses were trapped, and not a single life was spared. They would rape and kill the women. Men would be put into pairs, with each of them given a sledgehammer. They would fight to the death, and whoever won could stay alive and was considered worthy enough to become a member.
And he would have them fight each other until the last man was standing. And then he would say, well, you are now worthy to become a Zeta.
In an interview with The Spectator, a young man who fell into this trap named Rosario Reta said, "I was so shocked at the scene that I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. That's when he gave me the gun. If you don't want to be one of them dudes in the oil drums, then shoot this person. What other choice did I have?" And once you were in Los Zetas, it was almost impossible to leave. The rule was, you have to kill to become a Zeta, and you must die to leave Los Zetas. And by leaving, not only do you risk the safety of your own life, you'll more than likely come after your family members too. These were Central American migrants hoping for a better life, and sadly, with nowhere else to go, they ended up joining Los Zetas and adding to their misery. Cracks emerge. By 2012, their power was almost too difficult to maintain, and controlling the multiple factions centrally was not easy. In early January, one of their key assassins and one of the key perpetrators of the San Fernando Valley massacres, Enrique Elizondo Flores, was arrested. He was known for killing at least 75 people, and a cell phone video purportedly shows a smiling Flores dancing to reggae music with his comrades as he slices the ears and fingers off several victims. When asked if he had any regrets, El Arab said, "I only regret having killed those who were innocent and women." However, it was revealed that the San Fernando massacre was not ordered by the leaders of Los Zetas. In fact, the leader of the San Fernando faction, Martin Omar Estrada Luna, was told to keep the body count low, as it drew more attention. But over a payment issue, he retaliated by keeping the body count high. Another mid-level leader burned down a casino in Monterrey and killed 52 people. The reason was that they failed to pay for protection. This mid-level leader was doing this off the bat, rather than consulting with the leaders too. It was all getting out of control. And on October 7th, 2012, a devastating blow was struck to Los Zetas.
Mexico's Navy says it's confident it has killed one of the country's top drug lords. Heriberto Lazcano, the head of the Zetas cartel, is believed to have been shot during a gun battle with Marines on Monday.
A losing bet. With Lazcano now dead, Angel El Forti Trevino Morales was now in charge. Los Zetas was now at a crossroads, but another turning point for the group was not a drug war or a deadly massacre, but some racehorses. As they built out of their business empire, Trevino wanted to branch into horse racing, with his brother at the forefront. This business would also prove to be incredibly useful for laundering their money. They bred horses and competed with them in races. They did not even try to hide the fact that it was run by them either. Names of the horses included Forty Force, after his cartel moniker Z40, Big Daddy Cartel, and Break Out the Bullets. For FBI investigator Steve Pennington, he took this personally. Naming horses after various members of the Zetas, they put it right out there for a law enforcement and the American public. It was in your face. Los Zetas soon had 300 horses, which they bred in Oklahoma and California, and they were doing incredibly well and winning many races. But to many people's suspicions, they were doing a little too well. So, FBI investigator Steve Pennington decided to look into their operations. While you would imagine the FBI would have bigger fish to fry than investigating some horses, this was a way for them to take down Los Zetas, and specifically Trevino, in the same way that Al Capone was arrested for tax evasion. The leader of Mexico's most violent drug gang was going to be taken down for money laundering. Los Zetas found themselves in the news once again.
Drug war, one of the top leaders of the ruthless Los Zetas drug cartel is under arrest. He's Miguel Angel Trevino Morales. Mexican Marines captured him yesterday just across the border from the United States.
In a world of bad characters, analysts say Miguel Angel Trevino Morales held a special place.
With his arrest, a power vacuum emerged.
With Miguel Angel Trevino's capture, who will now take control over the Zetas, analysts say his younger brother Omar is a potential candidate, but they also say that Omar is a far weaker person, meaning the struggle for control of this cartel will likely be very messy and very violent.
It was his brother Omar who would take charge from here on, and the power and might of Los Zetas began to dwindle. 2 years later, a pre-dawn raid was conducted on Omar's home, and he too was arrested. Speaking about them in 2018, Correa Cabrera said, "Today, the Zetas are not what they used to be. The fragmentation of the Zetas has been enormous. The Zetas Old School and the Northeast Cartel are now the most important factions of the Zetas. Due to this severe fragmentation, whether or not some elements of these groups were even part of the original Zetas, it's difficult to link them to the personnel of the initial members because most of them are dead or in jail now. Even though their territory has dwindled, they still remain a dangerous force, and most heartbreaking of all, their legacy has lived on through new cartels. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel has adopted the same brutal tactics. Just like Los Zetas before them, they rely upon the bone-chilling maxim that if you frighten your enemy enough, you may defeat him without having to fight." Thank you so much for watching. Please click on the videos you see in front of you for more content.